They say every neighborhood has that one guy who takes the HOA too seriously, but ours had Doyle Mason. This man strutted around like he wore a badge, clipboard tucked under one arm, phone always ready to snap pictures. He wasn't elected. He wasn't appointed. He just decided he was the HOA patrol, and last week, he crossed a line that Grandpa wasn't about to let slide. Before we dive in, comment which country you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. It started with the creak of our backyard fence at 5:30 in the morning. I was still groggy, pouring cereal, when Grandpa, sitting in his rocker on the porch, muttered, "There he goes again." Sure enough, Doyle was scaling our fence like a burglar, phone in hand, snapping photos of Grandpa's tomato plants. He claimed they violated community aesthetics. Can you imagine? A 75-year-old veteran growing tomatoes was apparently a crime against the neighborhood. I wanted to storm out there and confront him. But Grandpa just raised a hand and said, "Patience. Let a fool show himself long enough, and he'll write his own ending." That was his way. Measured, calm. The opposite of Doyle's manic energy. The thing about Doyle was, this wasn't his first time playing spy in our yard. No, this had become a pattern. Twice before, we'd caught him poking around near our shed, pretending to be on some kind of official inspection. One morning, I even saw him rattling the padlock on the shed door as though he expected to find hidden contraband inside. Another evening, while we were eating dinner, a shadow flickered past the window, and there he was, peering through the glass like some uninvited watchdog. Doyle's obsession with rules had twisted into something much darker. And everyone in the neighborhood knew it. Neighbors whispered stories. Mrs. Alvarez across the street said she caught him crouched in her front yard, measuring her grass with a yellow tape measure, like he was surveying a crime scene. The Jenkins family said Doyle once took pictures of their kids' bicycles leaning against the garage and filed a violation report for clutter. It was almost cartoonish. The self-appointed sheriff of suburbia. But there was always an edge to it. That made people uneasy. Grandpa, though, never raised his voice. He'd sip his coffee in that old rocking chair, the wood creaking in rhythm, and say things like, "The louder a fool barks, the more rope he gives himself to hang with." It was his philosophy. Wait, watch, and let people show who they really are. But patience had its limits. See, Grandpa had already reported Doyle twice to the HOA board. And every time Linda Clay, the board president, brushed it off with that polished pageant queen smile she wore like armor. "Oh, Doyle's just enthusiastic," she'd say, waving her manicured hand. "He cares about the neighborhood." Enthusiastic? The man was scaling fences, peeping through curtains, rattling locks. That wasn't enthusiasm. That was trespassing. In fact, under North Carolina statute, it was a straight-up crime. But whenever Grandpa pushed the issue, Linda would pivot. Internal enforcement, she called it. Like that phrase magically excused Doyle's behavior. Grandpa wasn't buying it. He called the sheriff's office more than once. And while the deputies sympathized, they always explained the same frustrating gray area. Unless Doyle was caught in the act and charges pressed immediately, it was our word against his. Doyle had learned to operate in that sliver of daylight between HOA politics and actual law. And for months, it worked. He tormented us and the neighbors like a petty tyrant, knowing he was untouchable. But Grandpa wasn't a man who surrendered. Not after 3 tours overseas. Not after raising 3 kids on a mill worker's salary. Not after fighting his way through every obstacle life had thrown at him. If the system had blind spots, Grandpa would find a way to close them. That's when he hatched his plan. For 3 straight days, the garage became his fortress. The metallic clank of tools echoed out the door. Sparks hissed and crackled as he soldered wires. He hummed old Johnny Cash tunes low and steady, while I fetched pliers, bolts, and extension cords on command. His hands, calloused from decades of work, moved with the patience of a craftsman. To me, it was like watching an engineer and a general rolled into one. Every move careful, deliberate. On the 4th morning, our wrought iron gate wasn't just a gate anymore. Grandpa had given it a brand new modification, a low-voltage electric wiring system, perfectly legal under state code. He had researched it down to the letter. North Carolina electrical code allowed such systems, provided they were marked clearly, and marked it was. Grandpa bolted a bright yellow sign right at eye level. Warning, electrified gate. Trespassers will be shocked. I remember asking him, "Isn't this a little extreme?" He gave me that look, the kind that made you feel both foolish and wiser at the same time. "Extreme," he said, "is letting a fool run wild until he thinks he owns your land. This is boundaries, boy. Boundaries with teeth." Sure enough, the very next dawn, Doyle came prowling again. His silhouette crept along the fence line, the glow of his phone lighting up his face as he muttered about violations. From my crouch at the window, my heart thudded in my chest. Grandpa, calm as a monk, sat on the porch with his black coffee, steam curling into the cool air. Doyle gripped the top of the fence, boots crunching gravel, and dropped into our yard like a thief. He muttered something about non-compliant landscaping as he reached for the gate. The second his gloved hand touched the metal, snap. A sharp crack split the quiet morning. Doyle yelped like a startled dog, his whole body jerking back as the jolt surged through him. He stumbled, arms flailing before landing in the dirt with a grunt. For a moment, he sat there blinking, disoriented, then scrambled to his feet and limped toward the street. Grandpa didn't even rise from his chair. He leaned back, eyes glinting, and whispered, "That, my boy, was the sound of justice." By noon, the whole street was buzzing. Doyle Mason, the self-appointed HOA patrol, had been seen limping down Maple Court, clutching his hand. Red-faced and sputtering, neighbors whispered in driveways, laughter barely concealed. After months of Doyle's spying, his midnight measuring, his endless nitpicking, the man had finally gotten a taste of his own medicine. But Doyle wasn't the kind to take humiliation quietly. Oh no. By mid-afternoon, an emergency HOA meeting had been called. Grandpa, of course, agreed to attend. "Better to face a snake in the open than in the grass," he told me. I went along, partly to back him up, partly because I knew this circus would be something to remember. The HOA clubhouse was packed tighter than I'd ever seen. Folding chairs lined the walls, neighbors whispering behind cupped hands. At the head of the long oak table sat Linda Clay, pearls gleaming at her neck, her ever-present smile frozen in place. To her right, looking pitiful in a brand-new sling, sat Doyle Mason. He had clearly rehearsed his role as victim. When the meeting began, Doyle wasted no time. He stood, arm cradled dramatically, and pointed a finger across the table. "This man," he declared, his voice quivering just enough for sympathy, "is endangering the neighborhood. He's rigged up an electrified weapon. That gate nearly killed me." His words echoed in the hush of the room, and he looked around, expecting nods of agreement. Grandpa didn't so much as blink. He simply reached into his jacket, unfolded a crisp piece of paper, and placed it neatly on the table. His voice, gravelly but firm, carried through the room without strain. "That, Mrs. Clay, is a permit issued under the state electrical code, fully legal, clearly signed, and right outside my gate is a posted warning notice. Any man who ignores a bright yellow sign and climbs a fence he doesn't own has chosen his own fate." Linda's smile wavered for the first time. She cleared her throat, adjusting the pearls at her neck. "Legal or not," she said, "this kind of aggression goes against the spirit of community living. The HOA has the right to regulate all installations." Grandpa leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. His voice dropped into that low, commanding tone that made the air itself seem to listen. "Regulate? Sure. Trespass? No. North Carolina law makes it a crime to enter private property without consent. Doyle has done it 3 times. I've been patient. I've been neighborly. But I'm done warning him. Next time I'll press charges and let a judge sort it out." The shift in the room was palpable. Neighbors who had been silent started to murmur. Then a woman in the back stood up. "Doyle came into my backyard last month to measure my shrubs," she said, her voice sharp. "I thought I was the only one," another voice joined. "He photographed my kids' bikes and called them an eyesore." One by one, the stories came out, each more ridiculous than the last. Measuring mailbox heights, recording garage door paint shades, peeking through blinds. With every confession, Doyle's face turned a deeper shade of red. Linda banged her gavel, desperate to restore order. This is not the place for accusations. We are here to discuss Mr. Thompson's dangerous installation. But Grandpa cut her off, his eyes never leaving Doyle. No, ma'am. We are here to discuss obsession. You let this man run around like he owns the neighborhood, and now he's learned what happens when you step on the wrong porch. The room erupted, not in outrage, but in quiet, resolute agreement. Heads nodded, arms crossed, and for the first time, Doyle Mason looked like a man outnumbered. The meeting ended in chaos. Doyle stormed out, sling swinging wildly, muttering about lawsuits and vendettas. Linda Clay followed close behind, her perfect smile cracked, snapping at neighbors to remember your dues, as though money could glue back her control. But the damage was done. Doyle's armor, his illusion of authority, was shattered. Everyone had seen him for what he really was, or so we thought. See, humiliation can do strange things to a man like Doyle Mason. Instead of retreating, he doubled down. For the next week, his behavior took on an edge even Grandpa hadn't expected. He circled our block like a wolf, sometimes 3-4 times a day. His SUV crawled past the house, windows cracked just enough for his phone camera to peek out. At night, neighbors spotted him parked under the streetlight at the corner. "Headlights off!" Scribbling notes on that ever-present clipboard. Mrs. Alvarez called it creepy. The Jenkins family called it harassment. Grandpa called it desperation. He'd seen that look before in men overseas who'd lost their grip on control and couldn't stand the taste of defeat. A cornered dog, he told me one evening, eyes narrowed, will always bite before it breaks. Grandpa wasn't wrong. It happened on a Wednesday night just past midnight. The crickets had gone quiet. The moon was a thin silver blade above the rooftops. I was half asleep when the metallic clink of tools jolted me awake. At first I thought it was a dream, but then I heard it again. Steady, deliberate. Clink, snap, clink. I crept to the window, heart pounding. And there he was, Doyle Mason, dressed in black, bolt cutters glinting in his hands. He was hunched at our gate, jaw clenched, muttering under his breath as he worked at the padlock. His face, pale in the moonlight, twisted with determination. I bolted for Grandpa's room, but he was already awake, already pulling on his boots. His voice was calm, steady, the way it always was before something big. "Stay inside," he told me, slipping his old army jacket over his shoulders. "It's time the law sees what patience has bought us." By the time we reached the porch, Doyle had just snapped the lock. The gate creaked open, his bolt cutters clattering to the ground. He froze when he saw us standing there. Grandpa, straight-backed and steady, me just behind him, wide-eyed. For a moment, no one moved. Then Doyle found his voice. "You think you can humiliate me? You think you can shock me like some dog? I'll tear this whole place down before I let you make a fool of me." His words were wild, spit flying from his lips. Grandpa didn't flinch. He just pulled a small black remote from his pocket, the kind I'd seen him wire into the gate system. With one flick of his thumb, the gate hummed to life. Doyle, still standing half inside it, let out a strangled yelp as the current surged. It wasn't lethal. Grandpa had been careful about that, but it was enough. Doyle crumpled to the ground, groaning, twitching like a man caught between rage and reality. That was when the blue lights lit up the street. Sheriff's deputies, 3 cruisers deep, tires crunching on asphalt. Turns out, Mrs. Alvarez had already called them the second she saw Doyle creeping with those bolt cutters. The deputies poured out, flashlights cutting through the night. "Step back, Mr. Thompson," one of them called. "We've got it from here." 2 officers grabbed Doyle by the arms, hauling him to his feet. His sling was gone. His face twisted with fury. "You can't arrest me," he shouted. "I'm the HOA. I make the rules here." The deputy, a tall man with a trimmed beard, actually chuckled. "Buddy, you just broke about 6 laws on private property." "HOA doesn't trump state law." He snapped cuffs around Doyle's wrists. The sound was sharp, final. Neighbors poured out onto their porches, drawn by the flashing lights and Doyle's shrieking. Whispers spread through the night air, then chuckles, then open laughter. For the first time, the community wasn't afraid of him. They were united, watching the man who had terrorized them hauled off like a common criminal. Linda Clay arrived minutes later. Robe and pearls all the same, as if she slept in them. She tried to argue with the deputies, waving her clipboard like a shield. "This is an internal HOA matter. You can't just—" The deputy cut her off with a raised hand. "Ma'am, trespassing, destruction of property, attempted burglary, none of that falls under HOA jurisdiction. This is county business now." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, but for once, no words came out. As the cruiser door slammed shut on Doyle, Grandpa finally spoke. His voice carried across the quiet street, steady as a drumbeat. "You want to know the difference between a neighbor and a tyrant?" he said. "A neighbor asks permission. A tyrant takes what isn't his. And sooner or later, every tyrant meets a wall he can't climb." Silence followed, heavy, reverent. Then, like the breaking of a storm, the neighbors clapped. Slow at first, then building, until the whole block was alive with applause. For Grandpa. For justice. For the end of Doyle Mason's reign of terror. The deputies drove off, tail lights fading into the night. One by one, the neighbors drifted back inside, doors closing softly behind them. But the air felt different now. Lighter, freer. Grandpa sat back down in his rocking chair, the wood groaning under his weight. He took a long sip of his coffee. Now cold, but it didn't seem to matter. He leaned back, eyes on the stars, and muttered just loud enough for me to hear. "Patience, boy. That's all it ever takes, patience. And a fool too blind to see the trap he's walking into." And with that, the night settled again. Quiet, calm, the neighborhood finally at peace. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unbelievable HOA stories and neighborhood dramas.